The people who worry about being good neighbors are never the problem. And if you do find that you have a problem, and it's not easy to do, you might take a breath, bake some cookies, bring them to the board meeting, introduce yourself and say, I haven't been to a board meeting. It's a great pleasure to meet you. I've got this issue, and I'd love for you to talk me through this so that I can see what you can do for me and what I can do for the association, instead of coming in and saying, how dare you?
I'm Denise Haas, and this is Hey Neighbor, the podcast that dives deep into the real-life issues of HOA living, the good, the bad, and the downright complicated. All right, everyone, on today's Hey Neighbor, we're going to talk about covenant control. Have you ever lived next door to someone who has painted their house teal blue? That's like the color of the ocean blue when you go to Mexico. And if you did, you probably didn't live in an HOA, but then you move into an HOA, like myself, and then you get your first violation letter, and you're upset because you got your own violation letter because you too now are a homeowner in an HOA community, and you're like, what the heck happened to me that I did wrong? Only to find out they were right. And I understood, and I now have a bigger, better understanding of what my homeowners feel if ever I'm sending a violation letter to them. On today's Hey Neighbor, we have David Graf. He is with Graf. He is one of the partners there, but David is so much more than that. I have known David my entire career, and we're so crazy. We've come back to re-serve on the CAI Board of Directors for the Rocky Mountain chapter. And we have sat at numerous events together and BS'd and had a good time. David also has his own podcast, which we're going to let him talk about. But for today, we're going to learn all about covenant control, why it matters, why it's hated, and how is it really supposed to work. So with that, I have David Graf. Welcome, my friend.
It's great to see you. And it's great to be here. Welcome, everybody, as well. This is an interesting topic and one that we spend a lot of time and brain cells worrying about as community professionals.
We do. We don't like it for some reason, but yet we need it, and it's required.
It is. And I would go so far as to say it is perhaps under attack by our state legislature and legislatures in other states around the country trying to restrict associations. And it's a difficult time, I think, to be in the management world, just because we're getting lots of mixed signals, both from the legislature, from the general public, from the media, from social media like Nextdoor and other platforms. And, it would be thrilling for me to see a world in which all of that was slightly toned down.
When it was designed, of course, we didn't have social media. We didn't have all of the abilities to get instantaneously angry and get response to it. So when covenant control was created, from your perspective, what was it really designed to do?
It's a great question. And I wouldn't necessarily use the word covenant control to begin with.
Okay. What would you do?
Well, I would start, it used to be that communities would say a covenant control community. Now you see signs that say covenant protected community.
That's true.
It's not just semantics. It's this idea of control. The association is just a vehicle. It's a corporation, a way for people to structure their organization of how they want their community to look. Now, there's different types of communities, obviously. There are cooperatives and condominiums where an association will have much more infrastructure responsibilities. But when we talk about covenant compliance, covenant control, architectural restrictions, we're to the most part talking about single family or single family-like communities where owners have a degree of latitude to use their property as they want. And real estate, since the beginning of statehood here in Colorado and most states, was you buy the land and you get to do with it what you want. And over time, people realize that your ability to do something on your property was necessarily limited depending on the effect it had on your neighbors. And that is the law of nuisance. The law of nuisance is not being annoying, because if it was, half of us would be locked up on any given Saturday night.
And then it would flip the next Saturday to the other half.
Depending on the moon phases.
That's right.
But a legal nuisance is doing something on your property that you could do, but something leaves your property. Light, sound, vibration, smell, bees, flies, odors, dust, vibration, and it materially affects the use of your neighbor's property. And that body of nuisance law still exists, and it stands for the concept that we all have to live together. And as more and more people become, I want to say, crowded onto smaller parcels of land, it becomes more relevant what you're doing if it is affecting your neighbor's enjoyment of their property. And covenant control or restrictive covenants take that a little further, because we're not now relying on more subjective terms of what bothers your neighbor. Restrictive covenants are documents that are recorded in the land records against property. And if you want to buy a home in that community, then you agree to the terms of those restrictive covenants. And it really, for a single family home community, it's about expectations. So in Colorado, post-World War II, you can see them, for those of you who live in the Front Range, you can see them on the west side of Hampton and I-25 to some degree, block upon block of homes that have restrictive covenants recorded against them. And they might say, no chickens, no 2-story or 3-story houses, no shooting off of guns. Mm-hmm. And there was no HOA to administer those restrictive covenants. And so if you had a problem as an aggrieved neighbor, you had to file a lawsuit essentially to get your neighbor to stop doing that. And I think that was problematic historically for 2 reasons. Number one, there was great reluctance, understandably, to enforce the covenants, and a lot of things slid. And number two, no one wants to spend a lot of money on a home and be surprised. And your experience could be vastly different if you lived next to this person versus next to that person. And so this idea of an HOA was a board that is elected by all of the homeowners. At least once a year, somebody is going to be elected. Mm-hmm. And there's representative government to try to figure out how we not guarantee, but encourage owners to comply so that everyone's expectations, the expectations that they had when they bought their property, are met. And I talk about it as the original vision. What did you as a homeowner expect when you bought into this community? What did you want to see?
I wanted what everybody else, I wanted to know that everybody else was going to take care of their
right. Which is a lot of the rub.
That's a true statement. Nobody likes to be told what to do. I mean, they have probably the biggest investment of their life is their home.
Yep.
To have an HOA, of which they've agreed to when they moved in, supposedly read the governing documents, done all the things they should do, but then they get in, and the only time they want to hear from us is when it's not working for the people around them doing what their expectation is.
Yeah. And
then we get that subjective rub, even though we can clearly say, well, as you can see in point 3.27, it states this can happen or can't happen. And it's the word control, which you're right, I like protected, but we're happy to be there and then we're angry to be there at the same time.
Well, when you walk down a busy street, do you blame yourself for contributing to its crowd, or do you see the problem as being all of the other people?
I could probably be guilty of it's everybody else. Why would it be me?
Exactly. And when you take that and the idea that there's this concept of loss aversion, which is people are very sensitive or resistant to giving up something. And they'd be less likely to want to give up something than they would be willing to get something of a greater value. And so when you're asking someone to comply with the covenants, it feels like they're giving up something. And sometimes that giving up of something is helpful when it's diffused by them saying, well, everyone else is not doing it also. But
That's a true statement. That is a common statement we get.
this, you're talking about someone's house, the way they live, it sometimes has guilt and shame wrapped in, or value judgments about whether they're worthy. And quite frankly, the reality from my seat and from your seat, I think, is that when you go to your house every day, you don't notice the deterioration of the paint, the fading. It's slow, just like it's hard to, you don't notice that your children grow up from day to day until you look back at photographs.
I liken that to when you're driving to work and you blindly drive that route every day, and suddenly you look a little differently and you're like, when did that building go up?
I know.
It is that you don't notice you see your kids, you love your kids, embrace them, but suddenly they're grown up. And what happened to those 18 years? I can think of on my own house, there is this one particular area that was driving me nuts. Of course, we got the house painted, but it was like it wasn't there. It was there.
Yeah. It's kind of like not having a cup of hot coffee and then going to sip it and it's cold, and you're not exactly sure when it went from hot to cold, but now you know that it's cold. And similarly, covenants and property deterioration or just lack of maintenance show up gradually, usually. And sometimes you just get used to looking at things, and then you get a letter from your association or its management team saying, looks like you may need to paint your house. And your immediate reaction might be, how dare they?
That was mine.
Yeah.
And it was over something very trivial, but it just really did send me off. And when you take that pause and you're like, well, wait a minute. I didn't do what they had said, but I didn't realize it.
Being in the business, I used to get letters from when my former neighbors used to park their car with their trailer in front of the house. And I'd get the letter, and I know it wasn't sent just to me. And having signed those letters and written those letters to people and negotiated those letters, when I got it, I thought, don't they know that isn't mine? And the answer is no. And even though it was a courtesy notice, there was no penalty, no consequence, just a very polite reminder. I could feel that welling up in me, that I was affronted in my own home about something that was not mine. And I get it. It's very personal. It can be very personal.
How do we help that?
Boy, that's an interesting question. One of the things that seems to cause the most concern, I guess I would start with a step approach, one of which is it's important to educate owners and remind them why covenants, rules, and regulations exist, right? They're generally to assure minimum I use the word minimum, but communities are all different. It's based on whatever they agreed to when they moved in or what the community is going to decide now. Certain minimum standards of property maintenance, quiet, not too many vehicles and not having a repair shop in your driveway and oil running down the gutter, to remind everyone these were the original documents, the vision that people had when they bought in, and we owe it to the homeowners to try to deliver on that original vision. That doesn't mean that vision can't change, but at least we started with a common understanding of what this community was going to look like and what would be required of people. And then also sometimes helpful to revisit whether that vision is still appropriate for the community. I have a board member who's a career military officer, and he's ferocious in his single-minded determination to carry out his orders. And when he got on the board, he said, I'll take any hill if I have to, but I want to make sure that the community decides collectively that this is the right hill. And so they had a conversation about rural community. So, the things you might see in a Highlands Ranch type neighborhood more inapplicable. Do we worry about weeds? Do we worry about fire mitigation? What about this? What about that? Pine beetles? And they changed the rules, the nitty gritty architectural requirements so that the community didn't universally agree, but there was significant buy-in. And then they said, okay, until these are amended, these are the rules that we all live by, and these are the rules that we will all expect each other to adhere to. And it was much more voluntary. One of the other things that I think is a myth, but it's a very sticky myth, is that, and it's perpetuated by the media and quite frankly our legislature, which is homeowners are powerless and they're being destroyed or ground up by their HOAs. Well, the HOA is just the neighbors. And the HOA is tasked with following and upholding the governing documents, that they could be a part of the process in shaping if it's not going well. It's representative leadership, just like state, county, federal elections. We elect people to lead, and homeowners are not powerless. And that to me it's frustrating to have this narrative that adults who have bought, millions of dollars in some cases worth of property are powerless to shape the problem that they believe exists.
How when we have legislators stating things and then we get that dreaded 10% that have an opinion against the 90 that are basically happy in their community and like what's happening and doing what they should do, how do we get that together? And I don't know that we have that perfect answer today, but I am very curious from your perspective. How do we bring that together in the world of, I need it immediately?
Boy, so it's kind of a two-part question, right? Because for every person who is accused of violating the covenants, in my experience, there is one or more other neighbors who are expecting the covenants to be upheld. And so the board is trying to steer a sane and compassionate path in getting someone to come back into compliance while projecting credibility and reasonableness and concern to the people who are complaining about it. And that is the other side of this story that is never told, which is we're focusing, and I get it, human interest and hard luck stories. And there are abuses and have been abuses. And until the dawn of humanity has set, there will continue to be abuses that are caused by interpersonal conflict. But this idea that it's one victim against all of the bullies around them is just false. And the immunity from concern that the victim, the person who's being brought into compliance, or the legislature views these people, to me, it's as urgent as you live close to the problem. And if your neighbor has a blighted property, if your neighbor is making noise or smoking out your house constantly with their barbecue all the time, has a hot tub and they're partying until 2 o'clock in the morning, and it happens to violate the agreements that everyone agreed to, it's a problem. And this idea that covenant enforcement, covenant control, covenant restrictions is all about, ticky-tacky paint issues and counting the height of weeds is not true. A lot of the things that we enforce make a significant impact to the people who live around that house that we're working with.
Do you feel like, though, it is because they can't see it, feel it, to understand the value that it brings? We do get narrowly focused, and we stay focused on the 10 feet in front of us and to either side, and we forget to step back. We help preserve and protect real estate values.
Yeah.
People can't understand we're a portion of that, but there's a lot of other factors that play into it. But because you are already doing your role constantly, we are at least keeping you maintained at that. How do we help people see that? And I don't know, don't know we have the answers, but it is hard.
It is. If you were selling your home and your neighbor had a blighted property and you were losing sales, or you were having people walk through your open house and say, I'd love it, but that house next door is a problem, there would be nothing more important in your life at that moment.
That's right.
Right. And
we would know it then. We as an attorney, we as a management company, people would bring us into that and light us up. True?
Absolutely. All day long, every day. And we get those calls all the time.
we're going through that with the community right now. They're determined that their roof needs to be replaced because the home inspector said it. And we're like, hold on a minute. We have to look at the whole picture. And there's a lot of other factors that play into this. But it is still the association doing its job, but you can't feel it. You can see it in regards to, are we being maintained? Are there violations? Things like that. But long term, that same conversation still comes up.
So there's a couple things I think we can do, which is remind people that all of us in every community, in my opinion, are competing for market value, right? All of our homeowners are potential buyers or sellers. We don't know when they will choose to sell, but all of them will sell at some point. And as a minimum expectation, I think they have the right to expect that we will do what we can to enforce the governing documents to maintain the saleability or the market value of their property. Then the other side of it is the livability. Forget the sales. How do we best live together? And 50 years ago, people perhaps didn't need to be told what to do. There was societal pressure from the church, fewer employers, a much less anonymous society that we lived in, where there were other pressures telling us how to behave that don't exist today. And so today, with people working from home or working from millions of different employers, they may work in different states from their home. They're relatively anonymous. They may not know their neighbor. That pressure to behave in a certain way is gone. And as more and more people get on smaller and smaller parcels of ground, it's more important for people to have protocols on how they can coexist peacefully. And that, I think, unfortunately, is rules, right? We've always lived under rules since humanity began. And a lot of the things that shape behavior in the past are no longer as relevant or at all relevant. So now we have to figure out how can we live together peacefully. And to me, that's setting expectations and holding people accountable to what they agreed to.
If this conversation of, hey neighbor, is making you wish you had a better HOA community, check out my company, 5 Keys, an HOA community management company dedicated to unlocking the full potential of every HOA community we manage. Find out more about our 5 Keys to Community Success at 5keyscm.com. Now, back to the show. So when you think about that, what are the best practices for that you've experienced or that you've observed out and about in your daily life?
Sure. One of the things that is striking is the fact that communities have a very identifiable life cycle. They're brand new. The developer builds, may make promises to people to sell homes, maybe not, but often. And then the developer's out and the new civilian board is elected. And now their neighbors tasked with enforcing the governing documents as they're written, not as was promised. And sometimes there's a little bit of a disconnect. But once that bumpiness is over, they might buy 15 or 20 years of peace. And then one day, like going to your house and seeing it with different eyes, they will look around and they will say, this place has gotten a little bit run down. And now we have to dust off the covenants, inform people that there's an architectural review committee and start bringing this back into compliance so that we can remain competitive for the next 20 or plus years. And there's 2 ways that it's handled in my experience. One is there's a new sheriff in town, which is, oh my gosh, this place is falling apart. We need to take swift, decisive action. And the second way is the way I call turning the Titanic around, which is 1 degree at a time. Reminding people, you're an owner. Here's what the governing documents say. Here's what's expected of you. We're not making value judgments, but we would appreciate everyone's renewed attention to their property because we're going to start, periodic inspections with perhaps more frequency. We're going to perhaps send out more letters as we get people back into compliance, because if the homes were all built at the same time, they're all going to reach that stage where they need maintenance at about the same time. And I find that the turning the Titanic around method of educating people, reminding them of what the association does, why it's relevant, is far better than the new sheriff in town. Because the new sheriff in town often can get attention, but it creates this us versus them. And the reality is there is no them. All of the people who live in the community are owners, equal owners. They have the same vote as a homeowner. They might have slightly weighted votes depending on the docs, but it's just so much more palatable for people to be part of the conversation than to feel like they're being victimized and treated like children and castigated for letting their house, fall into the place where someone else has to tell them that it needs repainting.
Do you find that it goes along with moving from declarant control to a homeowner controlled board? Do you find that it changes year to year pending the board member, that the association probably was sailing along fine? You end up one board member, it only takes one change. And then you're doing something completely different, and there's a whole different attack on how we're going to work with the community and what's going to happen and what's being enforced, what's being looked at. Have you observed something that has been really successful for boards when they get that kind of transition that literally is almost a light switch going on and off from one board member to the next?
Let me see if I understand the question. Is the question, how do you pass the torch to people so that there's a steady hand on the tiller of the direction of the association? Is that it?
And it doesn't become whiplash to the people.
Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes you start with the whiplash, which is the people that we're making decisions about can vote us out relatively easily under the law. Mm-hmm. And the reality is these are our neighbors, and these are generally people who have every interest in their property, as much concern for their property as we do. And they may be in a different phase of their life, or they may be dealing with, crazy work or family or who knows what. But these are the people that matter. They're not the enemy. And what I find is that sometimes I used to say that single issue board candidates were terrible, meaning someone who would be interested enough to run for the board because of a single issue. And over time, I've decided that that's not a problem. It's only a problem if they can't see past that single issue. And most of the single issue candidates that I've seen come on who are frustrated with something, whether the pool rules or the lack of architectural compliance or the fact that a certain type of improvement has been denied, they get on the board and then they see, instead of power and rights, they see responsibility. And they become great leaders if they can temper their enthusiasm to recognize that winning people over is far less expensive and far more satisfying than fighting people to get to the same destination. And if they handle it as let me say it a different way. Every time you're in front of your homeowners, every time you send them a letter, every time you send them an email, anytime you get an email in, you have an opportunity as an organization to increase or decrease your credibility. And what I think we always want to be looking at is a way that we can increase our credibility. And one of the ways is to be, open with the meetings and open with the records and with the finances and be proactive in providing information so that there's none of that secret activity stigma that goes with what we do. And then
don't create the illusion of secret.
Oh,
because that is, is that
right.
not true?
Yes.
That's what's happening, is it creates the illusion of secret. And then you're talking about that board member. I like that one board member that gets on that has that one issue, because I say this to my managers and my team. Get on the board with them, because you're going to find when you start educating them, it's going to open their eyes, and they probably will be the best board member. Remember, it's the frustration and desire for change that got them there. So once they're there, they're probably going to take a minute to really try and understand and then make really sound decisions. And they actually usually do, from my perspective, end up being really good.
I agree. And that enthusiasm just has to be tempered. When you get on a board, you don't know the 20 years of history that led up to this frustration that you feel. But what we find is that, and we're on a board together, and we find how many of the new ideas that we have today that are brilliant were tried 20 years ago. And it doesn't mean we can't try them again. It just means that there's a history that we may not be aware of. And so for me, to be respectful of the history so that we don't recreate it in a negative way is the single biggest determiner of how effective that board member will be as a leader.
Just kind of going down this and talking from our perspective of serving on the board, have you observed, and it does tie to the covenants and inspections, things like that. Have you seen ever a board that just has this mastered in how they've transitioned information so that it flows so well one to the other? Almost like, here's the book, go ahead.
Yeah, I have. And I think
Can you elaborate a little bit about what it was they did so well?
I think one of the things that and I'm thinking of an amalgamation of a few different boards because, there's always something going on. But one of the things that they do is they have a way of encouraging people to attend meetings before they're on the board. And they set an expectation that the people who show up to a board meeting, other than the board members, are valued and that they will be listened to and respected as homeowners. And that is a very viral climate because the opposite is when people come in and they're disrespected and treated poorly and put away at the children's table and told when they can utter their 3 sentences to the board. It's very corrosive. And what I'm really saying is they're not drunk off their own power as an HOA board member. They're worried about their responsibility, but they're not so worried about their responsibility that they can't talk to people as neighbors. And the idea is that we're all in this together, and that means financial transparency, best practices with how we spend money, how we do business to the extent that we can in public, because the appearances of not being transparent, not being smart with money, not being open in our dealings is not always the truth, but it is fatal to success. And the other thing I think to realize is that human interest is piqued with Jerry Springer-like board meetings, right? People will sometimes
People thrive on that.
They thrive. Some people thrive on conflict. And that doesn't mean that we have to thrive on conflict. It doesn't mean that we have to tolerate conflict, but it also doesn't mean that we have to fight it and fuel it. When we show how we do business in public, and if you have a loyal cadre of volunteer neighbors who show up just to see what's going on, you have a built-in feeder system of board members who understand how to do it right. And when people come in and are respected, they don't come back with more of their neighbors trying to provoke and to fight, because association board business is often tediously mind-numbing and not glamorous. It's hard work about trying to figure out how to have a balanced budget where you can pay your insurance premium increases. It's not sexy work, but it's important.
You talked about that power and stuff, and it is tedious. And there is a lot to think about. Are we doing the best thing when we're buying this insurance policy? I'm going to bring us back to covenant control just for a little bit.
Sure.
Because you and I could talk about multiple things in a 30-minute span of time, and we would go, what the heck? Tell me a story about them where it went wrong for covenant control, it was misused, misunderstood, how the board came out of it well, that it was a mutually agreeable solution. What did they do?
Okay. Well, and I'm restricted. I can't give out information about a specific representation, but in general, one of the mistakes, I guess I would say, in covenant enforcement is to not see the process through. So it's easy to send a letter. It's easy to vilify someone. It's easy to say, let's file a lawsuit. And a lot of the hard decision-making needs to be made up front, which is, if we're going to enforce these things, is it worth going all the way to the end? And if it's not...
That's a good question to ask.
Isn't it?
Yeah.
Because what we find is that when we get into a lawsuit, as an example, over a covenant violation, and then it gets expensive. And then people will be deposed and might have to take off a day from work, and they might have to take off a day or two for the trial. And when we have not invested anything, we don't recognize what we may have to sacrifice in the future to get what we want. And as we start to sacrifice time and money and attention and board time, it starts to put the violation in perspective. And I'm not saying that we pick and choose which violations to uphold, but kind of like that original conversation, which is, which are the things that are important to our community? And if these things are important, we uphold them to do whatever it takes to uphold them. And for these things that are not important, we need to get them out of our governing documents so we're not chasing our tail, taking on liability for not fighting things or taking on liability for fighting things that are no longer meaningful. And not having that very frank, sometimes off-putting conversation very early in the process leads to, getting in the water when it's not boiling, and then 6 months later it's boiling and everyone's like, how did we get here? Right? And having that vision. And sometimes it's just not knowing what is ahead in the process.
Is that a good question to sit down with boards and say, what's really important in covenant enforcement to you? When you're looking at your community, what do you hear are the common things that people want you to really enforce in these rules? You got 25 pages of rules, but what's realistic to enforce?
It is. I think it's very helpful. And then there's the two other aspects, which is how do we enforce them in the context of what the legislature has created for us since 2022? Mm-hmm. And from a legal evidentiary or proof aspect, what can we prove? Right? So like dog waste, probably last I checked, it was the #1 complaint to boards in America. People do not pick up after their dogs. Well,
next to parking and pools.
I know. But it's a hard case to prove from an evidentiary standpoint, because no one is going to stand over the dog waste for 72 hours, let's say. And so then we have this proof issue, and we're spending all of our time chasing around someone who we may know is the problem, but we may not be able to prove it, when we might have said, okay, well, let's put in waste stations and bags. That's a much better use of the common fund monies than fighting these one or two owners. We do fight over dog waste, but it's, like I said, it's a proof problem, and it may be better dealt with by making it as easy as we can for people to comply, rather than making it as hard as we can to force them to comply.
Can I tell you a funny story? Because
Sure.
This just happened February or March. The board was doing an increase, reviewing their budget, all the things. Homeowners upset because it's an increase, not focused on the fact that we're trying to increase it to get more money into reserves. But they now start going line item by line item in the budget. They get to the pet waste. Mm-hmm. They're like, well, I don't use this. Make those other people do it. I am not kidding you. I bet I had a 30-minute conversation trying to explain the value of having those pet waste stations and having them maintained for $700.
Best value in America.
I was like, let me break this down, what this means to you in dollars. This is pennies to you. And 3 people left so frustrated. And I'm like, there's only so much I can say and help you understand. And I gave it every twist and turn I could possibly. The board was helping. I mean, I'm like, ooh, we are spending a lot of time on this, when the rest of the people are like, let's go. This is a good budget. We're good.
There are certain people who see only what they pay and they don't see what they get. And then there are other people who see what they pay and don't value what they know that they're getting. And it's very hard to have a values-based conversation with them for something that is irrelevant to them. But to me, spending, say, $700 for pet waste stations and bags is cheap. And it solves
cheap.
So much owner strife. Forget the board meetings, forget the enforcement, just the satisfaction of owners walking across their common area with less piles of dog waste is worth something.
It is definitely worth it.
it started with, how do you convince people of the value of these things? There's certain people that I don't try to convince the value of. I try to treat them respectfully. I discuss the vision, the board's obligation to enforce the governing documents in a reasonable way. But there are certain people who just don't believe it, and perhaps will never believe it. And for those people, I don't waste any emotional energy investing in their realization. It's okay for them not to value it. It's okay for them to oppose it. It's not going to change what we do. We wish them well, and as long as they follow the same standards that everyone else follows, we may never have to deal with them again. But right now, people will not be told what to do.
And I don't think we're going to change that. I like to believe it because I'm an optimistic person.
I do too.
But when I sit back and I go, knowing that I'm probably not going to do this, where can I find the middle ground in it? Where can I get to the middle that both sides feel like they got a little bit of something?
Yeah. Well, and I think that's a very important point, which is, like a teacher perhaps that teaches a first grader, and you never know what became of that person. You never know what grace that you give to someone who doesn't appear to deserve it at the time. You don't know what that does. But what I do know is that treating people like dirt, disrespecting them publicly, even when they're not showing up at their best, pays enormous negative dividends. And so it's like, okay, I stopped waiting for the homeowner to show up at the meeting, be told the facts, and then say, aha, I was wrong. Now my goal is to have them heard, remind them that we're all in this together, that they matter, give them the opportunity for the information, either to access or give it to them, and let them mull it over in private. To me, I would consider that a win with an encounter over a covenant violation dispute. You might not know, sir, that 42 other letters were sent out that week on similar violations. Did we get every one? Probably not. Did your neighbor not get a letter? Well, I can't say whether we mailed it or not from the meeting, but I can tell you, if you see a problem that you think has not been acted on, give me the address and we'll make sure that it's inspected and treated like everyone else is treated in the community.
Ooh, David, I'm going to stop you right there because that was the best wrap up ever. Thank you. But I do want to know two things. Let's do some common misunderstandings just really quickly because I'm keeping you long. Can my HOA tell me what I can plant? Myth or fact?
That's going to be a 2-hour answer. It can. It can. There are xeriscaping protections. There are other drought
For
tolerant.
Colorado, yes, we do have those
Water-wise
types
gardens, but generally, yes.
within boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
Covenants are permanent and can't be changed. Myth or fact?
Myth. Covenants can be changed and frequently are changed. They are covenants running with the land, and they last in perpetuity unless they're voted to be terminated or they are changed by the homeowners. And we amend covenants all the time.
And it's the best. It's a process.
It
Just
is.
like everything. It does take work, and everybody has to be involved. All right. Before we wrap up completely, if you could give a homeowner the best piece of advice about living in their covenant-protected community to be successful, what would it be?
Oh, there's a couple things, I think. Number one is be more concerned about being a good neighbor than you are with exercising your rights. That's not legal advice. I'm just saying from a mindset. The people who worry about being good neighbors are never the problem. And if you do find that you have a problem, and it's not easy to do, you might take a breath, bake some cookies, bring them to the board meeting, introduce yourself and say, I haven't been to a board meeting. It's a great pleasure to meet you. I've got this issue, and I'd love for you to talk me through this so that I can see what you can do for me and what I can do for the association, instead of coming in and saying, how dare you? Because the board members are humans too. And they don't want to be yelled at, and they don't want to be disrespected, especially when they're working hard for free.
So same question, but for board members.
recognize that people don't see the work that you do because it's largely invisible, and therefore they don't value it. Now, the fact that we see it and we know how painstaking it is and what a commitment it can be sometimes makes us feel like people should either treat us better or respect us more or feel our pain. And the reality is it's a waste of time to try to make them feel that. Instead, take them where they are as neighbors, right? Because you're going to do the work no matter what happens in this one meeting. So just, thank you for coming. I know you're upset. What I hear you saying is you're frustrated because you got a letter and you think your neighbor didn't get a letter for the same violation. And if that was what I thought happened, I would be frustrated too. So how do we solve this problem? How do we work together? That, instead of saying, who are you to be asking these questions? You need to comply. We have a chance to make an enemy or at least an ally potentially, just based on the initial 30 seconds of how we talk to people. And that pays huge dividends when the community is, on next door and saying, I went to the board meeting and these people treated me like dirt and they're horrible. And then they might throw in a few things that aren't accurate. And now the board members feel personally attacked for something that isn't true. And that hurts. And it's not always avoidable, but in many cases it is shapeable. We can control it within some parameter.
So before I completely close this up, you actually have written a book, which plays perfectly for boards. Want to share a little bit?
Yeah. So I've been to about 3,700 HOA meetings, which is probably fewer than you've been to. But no one usually invites a lawyer to go to a meeting that is not, susceptible to being a problem. And so I see these patterns and I see the mistakes that I've made for the last 24 years in dealing with people, both me getting hot and me disrespecting people perhaps, or giving them a taste of their own medicine. And what I find is that managers, lawyers, board members live in the world of fact. What is the budget? What are the documents? What does Kiowa say? What's going on here? Homeowners who come in don't have those facts. They have emotion. And I'm saying generally, this is not to say that people who come in to complain have no logical bone in their body, but they're often in a different state and they're frustrated. Mm-hmm. And it's very hard to have a fact-based conversation with somebody who is in an emotional state without reducing that emotional state just by a quick icebreaker, which is, I hear what you're saying. They've been heard. And if those were my facts, I'd be frustrated too. Just treating them like that can have a great effect on being able to have that fact-based conversation. But trying to just talk facts to someone who's emotional, it makes them feel like they're not heard. It often makes them feel like they're disrespected. And to me, it doesn't matter what we said. It matters more what they left with.
How we left them feeling.
That's right. Yeah.
So tell everyone the name of your book again.
Meeting Martial Arts. It's the hard and soft approaches to handling contentious meetings.
How do they get it, David?
Email me right now. I have a 43 video training class that I've been slowly releasing. It's been a training class that I've taught here for years in the U.S. and I've even taught in Australia. But dgraf@moellergraf.com or david@liferaftcoaching.com.
Speaking of which, thank you for that nice little segue for me. So while David was very lawyerish on this podcast, I want you to know David is probably one of the funniest people you will ever hang with or listen to. David has a podcast. Tell us the name of it.
The Pathological Lawyer. Thank you for that. Yeah, they wouldn't know that from today's episode.
No, they wouldn't, but I do. If you can go listen to it, I highly encourage you to. This man is a gift to the industry, but he's just a gift to people to begin with. And he is actually going to teach one of our board training classes tonight on covenant control or covenant enforcement. I will forever think of it differently. Thank you.
You're welcome. Catch you next time.
Hey, neighbor. On today's neighbor to neighbor tip, have you ever noticed that you have someone who may be down and out for a little bit, or they're struggling, or a really busy mom who's just been housebound and feels grateful that she's just able to get the kids dressed and in one place at the same time. Well, have you ever considered that if you're running to the store, to maybe just send a text to your neighbor and say, hey, I'm running out. Is there something I can pick up for you that's small or anything you need picked up? It's a small, simple gesture, but people really appreciate it. I want you to try it this week. Let me know what you did and what kind of success you had and how it made your neighbor feel. But more importantly, I bet you're the one who got the best good feels from it. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Hey Neighbor. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts for more insights on building better communities together.